Serie A managerial experiment. Okay, we've got all of these Milan Twitter Pioli out types that like to chase me. They call me out whenever Milan doesn't get a result. They're awfully quiet when Milan win. By the way, let's call that.
So they were quiet in the midweek.
Yeah, they were quiet in the midweek after the PSG game, but they're happy to call me out when Milan don't get the results at Lecce, which, ask Lazio how playing at Lecce worked way back at the beginning of the season, and ask most teams when they go to Lecce how it works for them. The fashion with which the points were dropped was very disappointing. 2-0 up. Got to figure out how you're going to go on and win the game. But they're clamoring for Pioli's head every time something goes wrong. Napoli fans have been unhappy with Rudi Garcia seemingly since the start of the season. So we have the experiment here laid out before you. And what did we say? We haven't really focused a whole lot on Garcia going. We know that Napoli fans weren't unhappy or were unhappy. But
ADL was very unhappy.
ADL in particular was very unhappy. Yeah, the biggest Napoli supporter out there, right? So we got Pioli, who's on thin ice, but Redbird says he still has his job. Okay, and you and I talked about this multiple times. Who are you going to get? Who's going to make Milan better than where they're currently sitting? Third in the Scudetto and only 1 point out of the qualifying places in the Champions League group. But at the time we were talking about is they were bottom of the Champions League group, 2 points out. So they made some progress there. So Pioli stays, Garcia goes, and Walter Mazzarri is now brought in to rescue this Napoli side. So Milan is the control, and Napoli is the sample in the Serie A managerial science experiment here. And I'm just going to start by saying this. I can comfortably tell you that Milan will finish ahead of Napoli in the table. Let's go to the decisions here, and let's focus on Napoli first. Your reaction: Garcia out, Mazzarri in.
Well, I think the first part is the funniest part, that ADL, Aurelio De Laurentiis, announced the signing of Walter Mazzarri before letting go Rudi Garcia. Officially, which I think is very comical, and it explains a lot what's happened lately with Napoli. But yeah, man, it's we talked about this Rudi Garcia. I don't know if it was last week or a couple weeks ago, and we're like, we especially when ADL mouth started going off about Rudi Garcia saying he's an age manager, doesn't know the game anymore. It's all past him. It's like, dude, you hired him, but you had the notion that his time is short, is going to be gone. But we kept saying, who are you gonna bring in? Yeah, you're not going to Scudetto maybe this year, but you're certainly a top 4 team. You have a super uber talented team that's gonna, it's one of the best teams in this league in terms of talent alone. Let it ride out. Maybe they'll figure themselves out and they're gonna get it going. Obviously, the main thing with Napoli is that when they go to these big games in like Champions League, for example, they do well. Rudi Garcia is good in those situations. Against the team they should beat, other than this weekend, they usually do well. It's the teams at the top of the table which they've been struggling at, and that's really what separated them from the top, Inter and Juve from everybody else. With the loss, obviously, to Empoli, you figure ahead was going to roll, and it was Rudi Garcia. It's not going to be Osimhen. Osimhen's injured. It's not going to be Kvaratskhelia, who was on the bench to start the game. That's probably our first red flag that he's going to be gone. The fact that they let him go, and then you heard all the different names, Igor Tudor and Walter Mazzarri were the names that came to the forefront. And then you hear the announcement of Walter Mazzarri. And before I get to my reaction, I do want to read a friend of the show, Zambo. I call him Zambo. If you look for him on Twitter, it is AILLIWRE. Anyway, he says, as a somewhat resident Partenopei, the sit-down chat, succinctly, Mazzarri is a caretaker for the rest of the year to hold a UCL spot. It's not a long-term solution, which in part is why I'd rather have this than go with whoever is out there with the money. We understand the situation, aren't expecting a Scudetto at this point. It's about stability and giving them time for a long-term successor starting next campaign. And by no means does this mean that the Partenopei are all on board with him as a caretaker. I'm neutral, but when understanding the adjusted goal, it makes sense, with which many outside in the pundit land don't understand. When you read that is the adjusted goal, it makes sense. But what have we said since this podcast has been going on for 8 years now, 8 years? The second coming of your favorite manager or favorite player never works out. Works out, right? No. As much as we want to. I mean, just look at the Azzurri for a second. I mean, look at Lippi coming in in return. Didn't do anything. We would love to see all these returns happen and do well, but for the most part, it doesn't work out. Now, Walter Mazzarri had a great time under Napoli the first time. Obviously, he had that fantastic trio that he got to operate under. And they did some great things. They had a nice, 3-1 win against Chelsea in the Champions League at home. That was a great tie against them, the two-legged affair. That was, 2016? I mean, how long ago was that? Does he still have it? All the teams that he's been on recently that have either been in relegation or been really poor, like the Watford, the Cagliaris of the world, does he still have it? Maybe he does. Time will tell. And if he's just there to be the stability and get them in that Champions League spot to the end of the season, okay, I understand that. It's probably better than Igor Tudor, in my opinion. However, don't hold your breath so fast, because the top four is not a guaranteed thing. Atalanta, they're pretty good this year. Juve obviously doing old Juve things, and don't forget about the two Roman clubs, and maybe Bologna gets involved. Who knows? But the top four isn't a sure thing, right? Milan might not make the top four at this point. Who knows? But the fact that they brought in Rudi Garcia now, I understand why they did it so early, because it gives them time to adjust, and you got the big winter coming up here. You got the international break to kind of get started with the acclimation. But I don't know. I'm gonna be a wait and see. It was certainly shocking, because I think both of us thought this wasn't gonna happen just yet. It was gonna maybe go through mid-season before this happens. I get why they win it. I know they win it after some big names. If what Zambo is saying is that, hey, this is just a caretaker until they get their manager, that makes more sense than saying Walter Mazzarri for life, because I don't see that happening very well. And hey, Mazzarri could come in here and really right the ship and then play fantastic ball and surprise us all. And I'm sure that's the part that Pay supporters want to see. It would be fun to see for the league, but I'm going to wait and see, because I'm not convinced by any return of any manager to a club that they were at before. What about you?
Well, there's a 2.0 going on right now that's been pretty successful. That's Carlo Ancelotti at Real Madrid.
I've heard of him.
And the other 2.0 that I can recall that I would probably call relatively successful is Jose Mourinho's second stint at Chelsea, won in the Premier League. I believe won an FA Cup in there as well. Maybe that's not what Chelsea fans want, but I think when you, I would measure that as a success for a second, for a return. Yep. But I'll name some managers that have come back a second time that I think pretty highly of, that it didn't work out. Arrigo Sacchi, we talked about that on this podcast. Fabio Capello came back to Milan a second time. That didn't work. Lippi a second time at Juventus. It was not okay. He got him to the Champions League final in 2003 against Milan, but it was certainly not the level of success that he enjoyed in the mid 90s when he had Del Piero, Zidane, the year that he won it with Ravanelli and Vialli and Paulo Sousa and Didier Deschamps. Spalletti's second go at Roma was maybe equal to his first. So it certainly wasn't better. Yeah, the 2.0, and sometimes it doesn't work out with players either. I mean, currently Griezmann's enjoying some success playing for the Atletico Madrid for a second stint, but you don't often see a lot of 2.0s go particularly well. And you can maybe say Ibrahimovic, but I think that his second stint was successful for the leadership that he provided off the pitch versus what he provided on it, or what he was able to do on it. So, I mean, Kaká's second stint at Milan was a disaster.
Sheva.
He also, Sheva. I mean, so the list goes on. So to that effect, the odds are against Napoli doing anything substantial here the rest of the season. And what's the motivation for playing a guy that's just going to be a caretaker, right? This isn't going to be the voice that you hear going forward. You got that to be concerned about. And is this a dressing room that has the maturity to be able to play through that? Lots of questions here. You can't just sit here and, Mazzarri comes in, and I do some of our Napoli friends are happy to see Mazzarri back. He's kind of a cult figure.
For sure.
With them. So,
how many times does Rafa talk glowingly about Walter Mazzarri, right? So, yeah, I understand that.
Yeah. Apex talking about Lukaku 2.0 at Chelsea. Yeah, I agree. So, I mean, and even Lukaku 2.0 at Inter, you could say wasn't what they hoped. I mean, it didn't deliver a Scudetto while he was there. It got to the Champions League final, but he might have gotten in the way of them tying that match. So that's what they, so that's what I think by and large you have to look forward to.
But look at it this way, because you also said it too with Pioli and Milan, is like, who of someone who they could rest their laurels on and say, you are our main guy through and through for the next several years, who's available right now? No one. I mean, the only guy is Conte. He's already rejected him twice. there's no one really ready. So maybe you wait until you find a caretaker until you get to the summertime. Maybe more options become available because the managers that you would want to be a long-term manager for your club are more than likely with a team right now, and so you're gonna have
Yeah.
to wait till it's off season so you can kind of, hopefully bring in some money and have them come into the league. So your team. So we'll see.
Well, that's just it. No one significant is coming right now when they don't have a window to work with to bring in to recruit the players that they want, and a preseason training to implement and install the way they want to do things. Okay, you carry out the way things were the rest of the way, and that's really that's really what you're stuck with. Back now to the team that kept their manager, Stefano Pioli, and I think that Redbird's line of thinking is consistent with what really needs to be the practical answer here. What's the problem? What trouble are we really in? We're in third. We're still in it in the Champions League. Why would we want to make this change now? Is kind of the attitude that they're taking. Okay,
100%.
we've had some bad luck with some results that we probably should have won. We've dropped 4 points that shouldn't have happened, because have they not dropped those points, they're still in third, but they get a lot more separation from fifth than they're currently in. And you know me and Richard, if you're listening to this podcast, we're behind where Redbird's thinking here. I mean, we've said there's just, who are you going to get? Who are you going to retread, or who are you going to get that the players are going to believe in to rally and see this thing out and keep a Champions League place for next season, keep top four and that sort of thing. Right now, your best option is the guy you got.
It's not to say we're not frustrated. I am extremely frustrated watching this team week in and week out. There's absolute frustration with Pioli, but I don't. My frustration isn't at the point where I think he's got to go, because who do you bring in? There's nobody in that you can bring in. I can't think of a caretaker that I think would do a good job. It would be the same job he's doing now, which is top four. That's the ultimate goal, which Redbird wants. And then admit, like Napoli's going to do in the summer, you can reevaluate. And if you want to make a move then. But, it'd only be more dramatic. I mean, and again, we have to see how the results happen at the end of the season. Obviously, Redbird want to go deep in Champions League, I would imagine, and also a top four. They want a top four. Scudetto's great, but they want a top four and go deep in Champions League, because that's where the money is. But, I don't know. I think Milan made the better choice in the situation, but again, I understand where Napoli coming from. Rudi Garcia didn't get it. He was nothing compared to. It was night and day between him and Spalletti, so I understand why he had to go there. But Pioli, I still have the faith in him, even though he pisses me off so many times every week.
But coming back to Mazzarri real quick, first 4 games in charge at Napoli, at Atalanta, at Real Madrid, hosting Inter, at Juventus.
Could get 0 points out of those.
Good luck with that.